They're going to plug in all the different names now and the
It
guests?
should, yeah. Michael, go to the attendees
The
list.
absentee
Attendee.
Participants.
right.
Yeah,
Ah,
the panelists and attendees. Panelists are us here behind
there
the
you go.
camera, and attendees is everybody that's joined. So if you go to attendees, on the right of their name, there'll be a little, it
Right,
should
I see.
allow
I
to
see.
talk. And
Yeah.
I
Well,
see
that's
them.
not his
9 so
concern.
far.
Yeah, Carlo, Derek, John, Carl Sanchez, we were just talking about him.
Was he on? I don't see him here.
Okay, so
He's in here.
Oh, attendees.
Well,
yeah,
Never mind. Never
that's it.
mind.
yeah,
I'm pleased to
Attendees.
see Matthew Connors is here. I was going to start off with a question from him if he
I
wanted
think
to
we
come
can
online.
allow them to talk, but if you want them on screen, you have to promote them as panelists.
Yeah.
That's how these webinars work.
Yeah, and we've been doing that in the past, and Virginia and you guys have been amazing doing that. So
okay.
yeah, if you
Well-
can control that bit, that'd be lovely.
I'm happy to do it. If somebody has a question, we will promote them to panelists. And but sometimes they don't accept the invitation, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not.
That too.
I like the fast pace of these talks. Let's not slow it down too much.
Yeah, it
but,
does slow down.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully people can come on board. Are we ready?
Yep.
See you
Okay.
after.
Thanks, Virginia. Welcome everyone to another quarterly Q&A gathering here with Michael Hudson's Patreon supporters. We are so appreciative of this support that comes through for Michael, and it's really helping behind the scenes. Michael, one of the reasons this is happening is because of, that this support is so important is because of Amazon and the commissions they're charging on your books. Do you want to just give us an overview of what's happening there and how that's affecting the pricing of their competitors?
Well, this year has really seen a total monopolization of the book trade. Ever since I started publishing maybe 10 or 15 years ago with Lightning Source, and now with the people who took them over, Ingram, I was allowed to set the commission that I was giving, and I always set the commission at 20%, and no problem. Most of my books were sold on Amazon and also a few others, and everybody accepted them. But now Amazon and other companies have driven so many other distributors out of business that I was told by Ingram that I had to increase the commission that I automatically gave to 40%. Now that doubled the commission that I had to pay. And that means that there's not really much left for me at all as the publisher or author for the books. And in fact, Ingram said that if I wanted to get on their strong promotional group where they go to bookstores, I had to give a 52% commission. Well, as you can imagine, after paying for the 40% to 52% commission, after paying them for the printing costs that they do for the print on demand, after paying them for their cut for over and above the commissions to the customers, the commission that they get, I can't even figure out what that is by looking at it. And there's hardly anything left for me to cover the cost that I have to pay for the book typesetters and for the book jacket designer, and for the copy editing and proofreading. So I basically end up with hardly anything for the books. I did not increase the sales price of the earlier books, but just essentially when they moved up from 20% to 40% of the commission for themselves off the top of the retail price, obviously that just left not much for me. So I realized, well, what am I doing this for? I'm not doing it to make money. I'm doing it because I want to spread the ideas that I'm saying, and I'm hoping that I would really love to have a whole group of people sort of organized together to promote the ideas I'm doing. And I noticed that in the late 19th century, over the United States, there were a lot of Henry George clubs, for instance, and people read his Progress and Poverty and decided to have clubs to discuss it all. I think there must have been a few clubs for other authors too. I wish there was some kind of discussion group we'd have today. Well, I guess this is the discussion group for my group, but it's not like clubs. And what I would really like to have a think tank with computer people able to make regular charts, regular statistical forecasts, statistical analysis to show how much of the GDP is really economic rent, not product at all. You know, what would a real economic profile of the economy look like? What is the profile of debt and debt arrears and non-payments and defaults look like? It used to take me an entire year to do just one set of statistics. The first time was for the US oil industry in 1965, and then for the US balance of payments, I spent a year at Arthur Andersen. So, and that was when I was doing everything by hand, giving it to the chart people to do. Well, now it's all on Excel, and I'm not a proficient enough in computerized drawing and computing that I can walk other people over what to do. We can sit down, we can look at the statistics, and I can say, here's what I put together. But I really need a group of collaborators, preferably all over the country or all over the world. And that I don't know any other way of popularizing and getting the points that I'm trying to make about debt and about taxation, about the reason why the economy is polarizing so drastically, and about economic history, except by this. So all I can do is meet with people like you guys and the few internet programs I'm on. I've just finished a long internet show with Nima, Dialogue Works, and we had Richard Wolff on that. Richard and Nima and I often do shows together between an hour and a half, because each of us have our own follower groups, and what we say is complementary, and we're trying to bring people along. And Robinson Eckhart is also someone I've done a number of talks with, and we're planning some more big talks in economic history. I need more people like that, and obviously the ideas I'm saying are spreading, but there's not they haven't institutionalized themselves yet. And without institutionalizing ideas, you can't make it actually into a political force of one kind or another. And that's what we have to do. I have more of a political force in China than I do in any other country, ironically. And because of COVID and on the airplanes, I've stopped taking airplane flights, and so I'm sort of stuck to handling working just by Zoom or by the internet, as I'm doing right now. So I'm publishing. I'm a victim, as long with all the other authors, in the fact that publishing leaves hardly anything for the creative people, much as in Hollywood or music writing and composition. It's this way right across the board for any content providers. The monopolists have controlled the platform, and once you control the platform, you just squeeze everybody out. So they're essentially working voluntarily, unless they want to be a celebrity on the popular media or TikTok. And I'm not. My celebrity days are over.
Well, a few people would dispute that. There's a huge fan base out there that love these videos, so great to see that feedback coming through. Flo says on the chat that we need Hudson Institute 2.0. And I noticed Virginia from our friends at the Real Progressive saying, isn't this a form of rentierism? And what I am wishing is that someone knew Jeff Bezos's ex, Mackenzie Scott, who's giving away millions of dollars at the moment in one of the most incredible philanthropic efforts around the world. So yeah, it would be lovely if one of these videos led to a philanthropist turning up to support your work, Michael.
Well, I've watched some of my colleagues spend having to spend almost all the time that used to be their creative time raising money. For instance, the most popular literary magazine in the country for the last 15 years has been Lewis Lafham's Quarterly, and he died a few months ago. And before he died, he was just being worn out trying to spend all of his time raising money, especially he was, I think, 88 or 89, 5 years older than I am. And he just didn't have the energy to raise money anymore. And in our age bracket, a lot of our colleagues who were his contributors just were dying off, and it dried up. Similarly with Democracy Collaborative in Washington, that had been backing a lot of my statistical research into GDP and national income analysis. That founder just got too exhausted to do it anymore. All of his time was in fundraising, and so I have a choice: either I can fundraise or I can continue to do all of the talks and the writing I'm doing, and I'm focusing entirely on talks and writing. So if anybody else wants to try to raise funds, they're welcome to do it, but I can't.
Yeah, lovely. And so in terms of commissions over time, can you explain what the long-term commission rate was across music, across publishing?
It was usually
because
negotiable. 20% was sort of the lowest. And for one of my books, for my trade theory book, somehow I don't know who did it, but somebody pressed the 52% give that I had to give as a commission. And of course, that left, I actually lost money on every book that I sold, the way that I'd priced the book as low as possible, so as many people could buy it. So I think 20% was normal. Many of the small bookstores wanted 40% discounts. But the academic presses uniformly, like Harvard University Press, would only give 20%. Only the big trade publishers that did like 1 million copies of books would give 40% because they made up in volume what they did. But now the publishers, like whether it's Amazon or any other group, will not accept academic publishers anymore unless they give this high rate of commission rate, the proportion of the sales price. So that squeezed the budget of a lot of university presses, and a lot fewer books are being published today because it costs money not only to do the physical printing and the typesetting and the proofreading of a book, but especially the proofreading. I'm pretty sloppy as a typist, and some of my books before were written with a lot of typos. I send transcripts of what I'm doing to Carl to put up on my site, and he has great fun telling me all of the typos that I've made and the work that he's had to do to clear them up. I can't be a good typewriter. I read and I remember what I thought I wrote, and what I read is what I imagined that I wrote instead of what's actually on the page with the typos all in them. So all of that, all of these things you really need. The books that I tried to do through a left-wing publisher, Pluto Press, were just disasters. They didn't have any proofreader. They had a very ugly typeface putting it in. They had awful book design, covers, and almost no distribution. So I realized that I couldn't work through left-wing publishers. My friend David Graeber had exactly the same experience, and he decided, we both decided we would only work through trade publishers who actually were able to pay the commissions that they promised, small as they were. And so David got me to a big trade publisher in Germany, but Germany's sort of dead now, and they don't want to publish any more of my books because they say the publishing situation there is so drastic that unless they're going to sell 500,000 copies of my book, there's just no market to break even there. So we're moving into, I won't say a dark age, but there's a darkening that's happening, sort of like what you have in the eyes that makes everything look gray or yellower.
Yes, well, Matthew Connors asks if monthly review press is a possibility for book publications.
Absolutely not. It is its writing is so ugly, so unreadable that I had friends of mine who've had their books published by them. I've asked them to send it to me to read it on the screen, and even though my eyes get bleary-eyed looking at the screen, at least I can make the print larger. My wife looks at me squinting as I'm trying to read the teeny print that they do in order to lower the cost by printing more books. And the typefaces they have are so cute and stylish and ugly, quite apart from the fact that I never did get along with Sweezy very well. I got along with his colleagues, but we go for different audiences. I'm going for the educated audience. They're going for a much more populist audience. I think once he said they really want incarcerated people, they want to get the incarcerated market in. We're just totally different personalities, saying totally different things, writing about different things with different political views and different political backgrounds.
Okay, seeing lots of good chats coming through and questions in the Q&A panel. We're going to ask questions via that Q&A panel, so fire them in there. But we really want to see more of Michael's Patreon supporters on screen, and I've invited Matthew Connors to come up because he has asked a brilliant question via the Patreon page on Palestine. Matthew, come on in.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, come on
Yeah,
through.
I can't see you, but
I thought I just turned video on. I'm sorry if I didn't. This is a brand new computer for me.
I can see you.
okay.
All right. Yes, in the question I put on the Patreon site, trying to just look to the future with this awful genocide in Palestine, and the idea of just, the forced evacuation of people as always, I finally understand this. I'm ashamed that I'm this old before I really started to understand what's been happening for these decades. But the idea of, having a plan to be able to force people out, and the whole idea of the Sinai, the Philadelphia corridor into the Sinai, the refugee camps that were first talked about as new cities being built by Egypt. And I know that Egypt is an absolute mess economically. They've been going through, just cuts to anything that supports living standard for people for the last 3 administrations, I guess, going back. So, how realistic is it that the United States and Israel will pull off this ability to force Egypt to allow the creation of refugee camps in exchange for debt relief? That was the first question I'm able to form. I have lots of other questions.
The word you use for debt relief, what they've offered is an IMF loan to make them even further in debt. It's not debt relief. It's loading them down with even more debt. That's the only thing they're offering. They're not offering any debt relief at all, just more IMF loans. That's all I know. I don't have any insider information or any particular knowledge of what's happening in that part of the Middle East. I am a Middle East specialist up to about 800 BC. But after 800 BC, I just haven't been following matters that much. So I do listen to Judge Napolitano and the guests that he has, and the Moon of Alabama. And those are sites like that, and Carl Sanchez's site. Those are the sources that I have, but I lost any ability to understand Egypt after the so-called Arab Spring, organized by the National Endowment for Democracy, when the population rose up against Mubarak and ended up installing his designated successor, Sisi, in there. So Egypt is just a total extension of whoever is president of the United States, in this case Biden, which means Netanyahu. So Egypt is a satellite of the Likud party, basically. So it's whatever the Likud party is going to do under Netanyahu, that's going to be the position of Egypt and the other people there. So I don't see there's any solution. I understand that President Putin has visited Iran and other countries and convinced them to essentially follow the policy that he's following against the Ukrainians. In other words, don't retaliate now. Time is on your side, and the other side is self-destructing. He believes that the internal strains on Egypt are going to erupt in another kind of an Arab Spring. Hopefully that this time the CIA and National Endowment of Democracy is not able to control, and we'll have a real Egyptian leader after the fashion of Nasser. They hope to strengthen Saudi Arabia. Certainly there's no chance of Saudi Arabia going back to anything like the Abraham Accords. But there's really nothing to be done. So it's as if the Palestinians are going to be all martyrs for what ultimately will be the collapse of foreign non-Islamic forces in that part of the Near East, from Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, but I don't see a solution happening in the short term. Iran is not going to bomb Israel. It's obvious that the U.S. and Israel are trying to spur Iran into a violent reaction, so that now you can have the Americans come in with all of their heavy bombing and do to Iran what they did to Iraq and to Libya, and that's leading these countries to hold back, just as NATO is trying to spur Russia into fighting back over Ukraine. They're very similar U.S. tactics in both cases, and in both cases, Putin has a strong logic for letting the internal strains of NATO, Egypt, and the whole right wing, including Israel, just dissolve from within, as you're seeing right now with the general strikes in Israel. That's the only thing that my only observation that I can make.
Well, I'm sorry to continue. Thank you very much so far. So BRICS, I know it's not a panacea. It's not big enough. It doesn't have, the bank is not endowed well enough to really be an alternative yet to IMF and other kinds of funding. But I don't assume it was Sisi who was all behind Egypt joining BRICS. I assume that was maybe in spite of him. But being in BRICS, does that at all give us reason to think that they can withstand U.S. pressure to let themselves?
No, I don't think there's any trust of Sisi there. I don't know how close that association is going to be. I haven't heard anybody in BRICS even mention Egypt. So I think it's like Argentina applying to BRICS. They may want to send delegates there just to try to slow it up if they can, or to be sand in the gears. But I can't see anything active. Egypt is so deeply in debt that it's just too big a burden. The BRICS Bank doesn't need any money in the first instance at all. It can be, if it's done like the BRICS Bank, or it can create its own intergovernmental credit. And the BRICS Bank would be so simply for intergovernmental loans for balance of payments purposes. But that would have to be done with qualifying countries. And I don't see how Egypt can meet any economic qualification for anywhere. And until the BRICS policy calls for a general repudiation of debts to the dollar and euro area, I don't see how the governments are going to have enough money to spend on internal infrastructure. And I don't see China saying, well, since you have to use all of your money to pay your dollar debts, I guess we'll have to give you all the money. Well, that would just mean that China ends up paying their dollar debts. And I just don't see that happening.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Carl.
Carl?
God, I've done that problem. Sorry, guys. Carl Sanchez asked that BRICS Pay seems like the replacement financial plumbing for SWIFT and the BIS. All that is needed now is a Bancor definition and a method to manage exchange rates in relation to Bancor on an ongoing basis. What's your take on that?
The problem isn't really exchange rates. The problem is the debt. An exchange rate no longer represents the real value of exports, because an exchange rate for a country is set not only by the balance of trade in commodity goods and services, but the demand for a currency in which to pay debts. And as long as there's a huge demand for dollars to pay the debts that are denominated in dollars, other currencies of the debt-paying countries are going to depreciate against this, because they're throwing their currency on the market for dollars. And by their currency going down, that means the price of their labor and raw materials and local resources are going down. That the effect of paying debts is to make the exchange rate, and hence the market prices of exports and imports, diverge further and further from their intrinsic value, or purchasing power parity equivalent. And unless countries realize this, they're not going to have a workable BRICS system. And the problem is that the BRICS countries don't have anyone really who studied balance of payments specifically, and they don't understand the workings of the foreign exchange markets and how they're affected by debt service. Most of their economists have been trained in the United States, or some in, you could say, England or Europe, that just reflect US neoliberal training that doesn't recognize the role of debt service as influencing exchange rates or even the cost of production, not to mention the relative income distribution of countries. And so if you leave finance out of the market, out of the model, out of the consideration, if you think that countries simply exchange in a market that is basically barter, and they call it the barter terms of trade, then you don't realize that most trade is actually not barter. We're not in the Stone Age anymore, and that wasn't barter even in the Stone Age. They're not educated to understand what the problem is. And I've had a lot of problems in China and other Asian countries trying to explain this. I had more success in Malaysia what I talked about at the beginning of this show, that what I need is a sort of a general movement that will be based on the analytic principles that I'm saying, trying to explain the principles that debt and credit are of key importance, and the difference between land rent and economic rent is unearned income compared to profits and wages. The classical distinction between earned income and unearned rent is critical, and that's left out of not only the curriculum today, but in the West, there's no longer the history of economic thought, not to mention economic history. So it's as if what I'm saying is just alien to most of the participants and the officials who are in charge of making the policy for these countries.
We've got John Chadwick with his hand up. We'll get to you in a second, John. I see Carl Sanchez, you're on screen. Can we see your full face? And yeah, I'm sure you've got a follow-up question. There we go.
Aha. Okay, you're on. Muted. I can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah,
How's
now I
that?
can hear. Yep.
Okay. Relative to what you were saying before Rick came on in your show with Nima the other day, in talking about the unit and how the unit is probably, as I think, is some sort of mascriova to go ahead and mask what exactly is being planned to be announced in October in Kazan as to what the BRICS are going to do with their system. It seems like the question was supposed to be framed in relation to there was the short video I sent from by the German that you looked over, or at least I'm assuming you looked at based on your reply, that talked about the BRICS pay. And so the whole idea of that, it was like, okay, well, this guy doesn't really know what's gonna happen because nobody said anything about how it's gonna work.
Well, what Carl's talking about is a show that I did last week with Nima on Dialogue Works. I just did another show today for an hour and a half on the U.S. debt on a similar thing. Nima had asked me precisely about what is this so-called BRICS Bank, and he had got this public relations release by apparently the BRICS that seemed to be based on a right-wing libertarian von Misesian Hayek anti-government model, wanting to make a kind of BRICS Bitcoin that would make billionaires out of the individuals that seem to have designed this and offered to, on a consignment, to plug it into BRICS and let the BRICS use it and bid it up in price, making them as rich as Jonathan Bankman-Fried was. And the description of they call it the unit, the description of that and the description of the BRICS Bank was so ununderstandable that I figured if I can't understand it, there's a reason why I can't understand it. And that is they don't want anyone to understand it because it's crypto, because there's something they don't want you to understand. Who designed this? Who's getting the profit from it? What is the money paid into the BRICS crypto currency? What's it going to be invested in? Will it be invested in gold, or just will it follow the price of gold? Who's going to be in charge of investing? I wasn't able to make head or tail of it, and when I see a financial proposal by people talking about crypto, I just suspect it's not that they don't know what they're doing; it's they don't want you to know what they're doing. So I thought that can't possibly be really, I would hope, what Russia, where it was basically worked out, or the BRICS are trying to do. And I read in your blog that you think this was just a diversion. that somehow they just don't want to tip the hand and let people know. I would like to believe that, but I don't know anyone who's working for BRICS who has the knowledge to put together a system as sophisticated as what John Maynard Keynes proposed at the Bretton Woods conference, that of course was opposed by the United States. So I'm in the dark, and until we know how they're going to invest the proceeds, if they need any proceeds. The kicker is that the BRICS currency was supposed to be bought and sold by private traders, private exporters and importers, and used as their savings. That means for everybody. In other words, let's make it another Bitcoin speculative currency. Well, that's exactly what you don't want for the BRICS. You want, what the BRICS need is some kind of intergovernmental financing arrangement. Right now, it's sort of a glorified trading in each other's currency, possibly with some kind of a price reference as currencies shift around. But again, you're not going to be able to have any price stabilization that will not cause losses by some creditors or some debtors, unless you deal with the fact that their dollar debt problem is bad. And you can't, if you're going to de-dollarize, you have to de-dollarize the debts denominated in dollars. And I don't see any discussion at all of that.
Yeah, that's definitely a big problem. I see that too. Let's, in trying to build this sort of a system, it seems like maybe the first step would be to go ahead and establish a non-dollarized commodity market. So
in a way, you can do that just by not using the dollar. You can do that when Saudi Arabia and China trades in each other's currency. The question is, what are you going to do when one country accumulates the currency of the other country? What are you going to do when there's an imbalance of trade? All of this works very well just for the equivalent of a barter deal when it's a bilateral trade. But what are you going to do? You have to think of all of this as a financial system. And I don't know who's taught to think in terms of financial systems anymore. There was something called systems analysis when I was in my 20s, but that was 70 years ago, 60 years ago.
Yeah, don't go too far.
Time flies.
The central bank digital currency idea of using that as a specific type of a bancor that would work between the central banks and that would be their transmittal unit. But then you still have the issue of trying to go ahead and deal with imbalances. So you need some sort of a regulator governor type of a situation where the BRICS bank institution could go ahead and take that on. But again, who's going to go ahead and do that along with the other functions of the bank?
Well, so, I don't think it's a digital currency. It's when you go to your bank, that's a digital currency. SWIFT, the bank clearing system to send money from one bank to another, that's digital. It's a cryptocurrency, and crypto, you don't have a clue what's happening. That's crazy. The one thing you need if you are a central bank acting on behalf of the governments who are members of the organization is it not be crypto. It has to be quite out in the open. You have to know what the balances are. And crypto doesn't do it because it's crypto.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't implying that the central bank digital currencies should be crypto. It's just that's the.
But there your word for it. I mean, anything is digital if it was on a computer. So I'm not.
Yeah, everything's digital. Your debit card is digital.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of it once was a new and improved, but type of term, but now it's commonplace, and that's how it is.
Yep.
Escobar has lots of faith in Glaziev, the Russian economist who works for the European Economic Union. I don't know, from what I've read from him, he doesn't seem to be well versed either. I don't think that I think that the whole problem is what you've put your finger on, is that the whole issue of debt just has never been taught for so many years, and it's been erased out of the system academically. So who are you going to? You need to have established a school, if you will, just to go ahead and teach this one fundamental in order to go ahead and get people on the people who are the treasurers of governments. You know, to be that would be the first cadre you'd want to go ahead and teach, would be those people.
Well, how do we organize a group like that? That's the question.
Yeah.
How do we institutionalize that?
So yeah, so I agree with all, you know, what the goal is there. You know, how do we go about doing it? That's the whole the other big thing. And then the problem is also that there's a rather large battery of people out there with lots of money that don't want us to do that.
Yep. Right. There's like sterile fruit flies or mosquitoes that are let into the environment just to distract attention.
Yeah. So
we're gonna have to I've got someone who's been waiting for a while, so come back on a bit later. That'd be great.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, always good to hear from you. But John Chadwick, come on through. He's coming up. And yeah, we've got a whole pile of questions on the Q&A to get through. Sunil Bazu's got some great ones, so we'll get into that and get onto them in a minute. Yeah, John was going to come through. Is he there?
Hi, I'm here. I clicked the unmute button, but what happened with my video? There we go. Can you hear me?
Certainly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Michael, I wanted to thank you, by the way, for giving some good advice a long time ago about like gold was a good investment. I got rid of my financial advisor and I said, just give me all my money, and I invested most of it in gold, and then I kind of lost my nerve and then went to some of it in the stock market. And now in hindsight, I should have stuck 100% with gold. But this is a question, it's somewhat like of an investment question, but it's what many of us are faced with, especially people in their 40s or younger. You know, you live near a big city, you can't afford a house, it's just ridiculous, right? And you have extra money, you know, you have savings, and then you look at the different options of, well, where can you invest? And you listen to some investment show like this David Lynn, and you constantly hear financial people, and you know, they don't give any of the perspective that you've given. Especially, I think only once I've heard someone mention debt, consumer debt. It's just none of the ideas that you talk about are there. So I guess we're always discussing, well, what do we invest our money in? We know that the stock market is very unstable at this point, and it can have a huge crash. You know, we talk about, just talked about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is based on nothing, like nothing is backing it up whatsoever, right? And then the other thing was, well, you can hold on to it and wait till the crash, but you know, things aren't going to bounce back like they have done in previous crashes, according to everything I've heard from you, especially with the, you know, and no one mentions deindustrialization practically. So the only thing that really came to mind, that's what I'd like you to comment on, is if you're in the thing to invest in would be something that has good future demand from China or any of the countries that are growing, and that you can invest in without being penalized, right? Without worrying about being penalized. So if it was an Indian ETF that was all about things that China was buying, then that might be a good bet. Or something, a country in South America that had something like, you know, Colombia is growing, and well, Brazil is, you know, the socialist countries, right? Like we have kind of more hope in the socialist countries growing than we do of anyone else. That's the jungle, right? That's growing. So I guess, you know, we have to say something to like I could raise my Patreon membership with more good advice, and so could a lot of other people. So, I guess a shout out to other people to appreciate the advice, information you give, because it helps them make great decisions. And, we're all in favor and supportive of what you're doing.
Well, you're sort of lost if you're looking for something China's buying. There's really only one thing that China's buying or would like to buy in America, and that's politicians. So I think if you can invest in a politician, that for some portion of what China will pay to buy him or her, I think that would certainly be a growth industry. But even if you get you find something that China wants to buy in U.S. or maybe even the Western Hemisphere, the United States will sanction it and prevent the U.S. from selling it to them. For instance, China wanted to buy Intel computer chips. And so the Intel company was the recipient of, I think, $10 billion of support for President Biden's attempt to spur computers here, and was all set to build a big factory out in Colorado or some Western city. And until now is just announced that it's teetering on bankruptcy because the government prevented it from selling to the Chinese market because they're our enemy. And if you if you give China anything it wants, then it must want them for some hellish purpose that is not that of the United States. So Intel said, well, our market was 30 or 40% in China, and by banning China, you instead of being able to use the qualify for this $10 billion that you were going to give us to build a factory, now we can't build a factory because we're broke, because we can't sell to China anymore. So I don't know how you can solve the problem of buying something that China wants to buy, particularly. If there is something that it wants to buy, it realizes that the United States is treating it like a deadly enemy, and it better produce it itself or have it produced in friendly countries that are not going to be very amenable to American investment. So I think you better stick with 10-year government treasury bonds.
Yeah. Well, we have something similar here in Canada. GICs. But I guess, do you have any guess on when this great they call the financial or the stock market almost an inverted triangle, right? And it's or a bubble, as you and Radical were talking about it, as to when this might collapse, because what I still see is that gold will certainly still continue to go up, especially after, because you have all this liquidity, it has to go somewhere, right? All these people in the stock market, because like you said, since Obama bailed out the banks in 2008, there's all that money. And when people get spooked and when the bubble bursts, the liquidity has to go to somewhere. So, and all of the other information that you've given us on the de-dollarization, and I hear places reports it's going slowly, but I also look at Russia. Look how fast de-dollarization went after the Ukraine war started, right? And so it can go very quickly. And with all these, there's so many events happening, right? With repossession of Russian assets, and the Venezuelan gold and all these things, and then the Saudis aren't selling oil anymore to the U.S., so they have all these treasury bonds that they want to get rid of. So you have so many incentives all over the place. That there's so many reasons for the de-dollarization to continue, and it's just a matter of when this kind of takes off, right?
Well, liquidity can go into outer space. What appears to be liquidity is so heavily debt leveraged that once there's a break in the chain of payments, the whole house of cards will come down. Now, every crash has always been the result of some particular firm making a bad investment. Very often, it could be a rogue trader for the firm, and the rogue trader will have made a huge bet and pulled the firm down. That's what's happened for the last maybe 150 years. So there's no way of foretelling when an accident is going to happen. All you can say is the economy is more and more accident prone. We don't know when, but you better figure out a scenario for what is going to happen when the highly debt leveraged stock and bond holdings all have to be written down. It's not going to make the private sector investments very attractive.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I guess I think I'm going to personally stick with much of gold and some GICs and just hope for the best, I guess.
Yep.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Good work. We've got some great questions here in the Q&A, and Sunil Basu has 5 or 6 I want to try and get through here, Michael. So will military Keynesianism be sufficient to provide a cushion for the US economy for a number of years as the US drains Europe?
Did you say Keynesianism?
Yeah, military Keynesianism.
I don't understand how. How on earth? You're having a financialized economy. You're having exactly everything that Keynes warned against. Keynesianism is the euthanasia of the rentier. What you're having is the coronation of the rentier. So I don't see any Keynesianism at all. You're having an impoverishment of the wage earning class and the consumers, and a crowding out of corporate investment, corporate profits, and wage income for debt service. So I don't see where Keynesianism is anywhere. And certainly you can't call the war spending military Keynesianism. That's a travesty. So no, I don't see any hope of Keynesianism at all. It's a bygone world.
Really, I'm surprised with the $1 trillion US military budget, much of that expenditure in marginal seats throughout America. I would have thought that was a pretty reasonable call.
They can call it Keynesianism, but Keynesianism was not just a gimmick, it was a whole system of logic. And it's true that he said you could simply build pyramids to employ labor. But the military spending is much worse than building a pyramid, because at some point you're going to have to use these weapons, and that's driving the whole rest of the world away. That's catalyzing the break between the BRICS countries and the NATO West, and that is not going to be good for the American economy. It'll leave the NATO West in America just isolated, and I don't know how they can rebuild their own industrial capacity, even from scratch, without confronting the debt issue. They don't have enough money to pay their debts and to finance new physical investment in productive capacity. And physical investment in capacity and employment takes time. Paying your debts is immediate, and the financial sector and the corporate financial officers live in the short run, not the long run.
Well, I just can't believe American debt. What's it at now? $34 trillion or something? How much longer is this con going to go on, Michael? When is it finally going to be called out? And will a jubilee be an automatic reaction that's pulled off the policy shelf there in the Pentagon or wherever?
It won't be a matter of policy. Nobody's going to voluntarily say, gee, Michael Hudson's explained the logic for a jubilee and we want to reindustrialize. There will simply be bankruptcy, and it'll be like 1931, when 2 years after the Depression, the stock market crash of 1929, finally, the Allies and Germany got together and they declared a moratorium on German reparations and inter-allied debt service to the United States, and essentially that moratorium just became, in effect, a debt cancellation. So it won't be a issue of policy. It will be just there's no money to pay. It may be a policy on the part of the BRICS that are deciding we don't want what's happened to the West, having its industrial economy grind down to nothing. We don't want that to happen to us. But the West is not going to take that policy, because the Western economies are run by the financial sector. That's how the nation state was created in the 17th and 18th century, as a means of assuring the international banking class that unlike royal debts that would continue to go bankrupt when the kings couldn't pay out of their royal budget to pay their creditors, nation states have the power, being democratically representative, of pledging all of the income that they had. Holland, England, those are the leading examples. And the nation state, or a fiscal state, you could call it, was created as a vehicle to serve the financial sector as a debt collecting intermediary. So international policy isn't set by nation states anymore. It's set by the financial sector that doesn't really have a policy. It has, what it passes for economic analysis is the cover story for how they would like people to believe economies work, is sort of the narrative to justify itself, but they certainly don't have the ability to analyze how to create an economic policy that benefits the economy as a whole, instead of the financial sector, whose aim is to extract income from the economy as a whole. So I see the debt cancellation as in the 1920s happening just through bankruptcy. And you remember what the Secretary of the Treasury, I think from Pittsburgh, Mellon, said: liquidate everything, liquidate factories, liquidate debts, liquidate people. I don't know if he added that, but liquidate everything. That's their version of the Jubilee year.
Okay, well, Sunil asked, is there a derivatives Ponzi scheme that sits on top of the debt pyramid, and how does that work?
Wait, can you say that again?
Is there a derivatives Ponzi scheme
No.
that sits on top of the debt pyramid?
Yeah.
And how does that work?
It works like a horse race. People take a bet as to which way currencies or interest rates or stock prices or bond prices are going to work, and you pay to get an option to sell or to buy at a given price. And essentially, there are all these bettors, and somebody's going to make the wrong bet. And in derivatives, they're almost always made now by parties that have nothing to do with the direct buying and selling of a commodity like it used to be 100 years ago, but they're financial betting instruments, and they're financed by on credit by debt. And if you bet wrong, like AIG bet when it went bankrupt and had to pay Goldman Sachs in 2008, prices that Goldman Sachs set all by itself, well, then that can pull the whole system down. It's like it's like you bought a stock that's way overvalued and suddenly plunges, like the stock market crash of 1929. And there were plenty of derivatives in effect back then. They were called puts and calls, and a derivative is sort of an elaborate put and call a betting scheme that is highly financialized, and they're cross betting. You'll make it you'll try to get one bet. If something goes up here, then something else will go down there, and you try to get cross derivatives often, so that if you lose on one derivative, you'll make money on other derivatives, and there will be some arbitrage margin in between that you can make money for. That it has nothing to do with the productive economy whatsoever. It has to do with you almost have to be insider dealer to be able to play that game, or a company with a large enough tens of hundreds of billions of dollars to manipulate the market, to actually come in and just if everybody thinks a stock will go down, you put in $10 billion to bid it all up. And that's called a short squeeze. People will say, here's like Intel. It's going to go under. Let's sell the stock short. It's sure that its stock price is going to go down now that they say they've lost the China trade. Well, there are a lot of people that sold it short. So now you'll get a company, a group of private capital companies that come in. Let's all buy Intel stock and force it up. And all of a sudden, the speculators that have sold Intel short will be squeezed, and they'll have to cover what they've done, the bets they've made. And if they bet enough, they'll bring down the whole institution they're for. And the word on for this kind of short selling on Wall Street used to be, he who sells what isn't hism has to pay or go to prison. Well, that's going to happen for at some point when there's a break in the chain of payment. And if one party in all of these derivatives and speculators and brokerage companies can't pay, it reverberates all down the financial supply chain. That's what we're seeing, or would see in a crash.
Okay, well, Sunil takes us into conspiracy land here. Do you believe that there's some significant parts of the oligarchy, Davos said, Bilderbergs, who want to find ways of creating massive population decline, i.e. through virus development, even as Nelson Rockefeller, Boris Johnson, and Elon Musk have large families?
I don't see any sign of a conspiracy, but then I wouldn't be invited to sit in on such a conspiracy. This isn't conspiracy, that's national policy. The policy is to decline the population. Look at what the CDC here is doing about COVID, saying it's just like a cold. Well, a lot of people are getting long COVID. Just essentially making them tired all the time. Take the third largest source of death by men in the United States is prostate cancer. And yet that's the easiest form of cancer to cure. All you need to do is every 2 years, you get a PSA test, blood test. It'll show, whether you have prostate cancer. In America, they've stopped giving tests of people. Once you turn 75, you're advised, well, it's so slow growing. If there is any cancer, you'll die of natural causes before the cancer gets up. Well, that doesn't happen for tens of millions of Americans. Well, I mentioned this as an example to Nima a few months ago, and he said he works out of Brazil. He said in Brazil, every male is required by law every 2 years to have a PSA test. And if you have that every 2 years, then it's very simple to, if you have a PSA test and it shows you have cancer, you take some pills. It's easy to, you may have to have a biopsy and some radiation treatment, easy to cure. That's not the case in America. So you have prostate cancer for men, you have COVID for many men, you have a number of epidemics that people are worrying now, like monkeypox and bird flu and all sorts of things. So it's not a conspiracy, it's very explicit policy. And I remember in the 1970s, there was all this pressure by the Club of Rome that was saying that the planet cannot afford to have 1 billion more people. We've got to have policies to stop it. And certainly that's got, as you said, the big foundations are all into how do we limit the population and all that. And it looks to me like one way to limit population is to deprive it of proper medical care. And that's what the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States is for, to make sure that people do not avail themselves to proper medical care, not wear masks. McDonald's hamburger out in, I think, Oregon has banned people, customers from wearing masks inside the McDonald's, and my neighboring counties in Long Island here in New York, I think put laws up for vote for banning masks in their territory. They said, well, who may wear a mask? Well, crooks may wear masks. Well, shoplifters may wear masks. So you can't have people wear masks. Well, if you don't have the anti-COVID mask, you can just imagine there's no protection against COVID or any other virus. So how on earth can you explain the policies of the United States and other countries? And I must say that China also has not acted very strongly against COVID. There was a short lockdown that really created a crisis. Almost my entire Chinese publishing team has long COVID. The heads of the team, the types that are all sorts of, they've all got COVID in trips to Beijing or other Chinese cities, or simply by having food in the dining car on the speed train in China. Taking off your mask and eating in a restaurant can give you long COVID. So certainly China wouldn't be part of this conspiracy. I can't imagine. And yet it's a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, Michael, I don't know. I'm going to challenge you on this because through the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, we've all had record immigration programs. And when George H.W. Bush announced the New World Order, I always want to ask you this, what do you think he meant? Because for me, what I see is that post-globalization, as we exported all our pollution to China and the Asian sort of center there, it became about big property, big infrastructure, and big debt. And underwriting all that was the easiest trick in the economic playbook, and that is to pump your economy full of people so that there's a downward push on wages and an upward push on land rents. And here we have 30, 40-year-olds looking like they're going to be stuck renting for the rest of their life. So I kind of feel I'd love to hear you tease out this change away from manufacturing base, and you often talk about the finance side of things, but infrastructure, population, these sort of things are also significant factors.
Yes, they certainly are. I can't make sense of policies that don't seem to make sense at all. Not only George H.W. Bush, but it was Jimmy Carter just before Reagan that wanted to press for immigration, especially from via Mexico into the United States, because that was explicitly to break labor union power and lower wages. So certainly there was that design, and that was discussed very openly in the 1970s. I mean, I sat in on many discussions saying that, and it was anti-labor. So yes, I think many policymakers segregate what they're focusing on just in one particular tunnel vision area, and they don't think of the entire overall system. When you put it into the context of an overall system, it doesn't make sense. Or you think, how can they do these so contradictory things? Well, they don't think in terms of systems. So we're dealing with a kind of anarchy, again, because economic theory is not organized as systems analysis, looking at the overall economy and its interactions.
Very good. If anyone's interested in coming on screen, please put your hand up. Seeing some very interesting commentary from Mark Batko, someone we haven't seen before. And here comes our old friend Flo. So let's get you up on screen. I can find you. good. Come on through.
Very dark.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe that helps. Yeah, I wanted to ask if you had heard or read about Jeffrey Sachs has a new article out, and he was just on Breaking Points, which incidentally I've been trying to say I think you should try and get on there because they have a massive audience. But yeah, talking about his experiences immediately post-Soviet Russia, like 1990, I guess he was there. I wasn't aware that, you know, he was mentioning he has a background in international finance and economics. And so he was there trying to help out is his way of saying it. He said he's a social democrat, and was trying to sort of advance some Keynesian ideas, even was advocating for some debt jubilee or debt cancellation in Africa and stuff. And it just reminded me, I know that you've spoken about your experiences there as well. You were around the same time, right? When 1990, 1991. So yeah, I'd just like to get your thoughts on that time, what you learned, if you ever ran into Jeff Sachs, and kind of what that was like.
I was taken by one of President Nixon's consular economic advisors into Jeffrey Sachs's office, but he wasn't there. And they said he's hardly ever there. He really just works in the United States following things. Jeffrey's been giving wonderful speeches recently, all over the place. And you can see when he does his YouTube interviews on Judge Napolitano, for instance, you can hear him getting angrier and angrier and angrier. He realizes that he's been taken, and he really believed the neoliberal ideas that he was promoting. Remember, it was Sachs that destroyed Yugoslavia, that viciously tore it all apart under the IMF to deliberately break it apart so that the Tito and Serbia could not extend credit to the rest of Yugoslavia and make it a uniform. So Sachs was the butcher of Yugoslavia, but he really believed what he was doing. He didn't mean to be a butcher. He was just a mad killer. And then he went to Russia and thought he could be, all it needed was to be a butcher again. And then he realized that somehow he woke up and said, you know, I'm looking at what I did, and I was a butcher. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The United States told me that they were going to help and give Russia enough food so that when I butchered them, they'd get a lot of good meat out of it. And we didn't get good meat out of it. So he's essentially doing a mea culpa now for all of the things that he'd done before. And he realizes that he was just the front man for being naive, for believing what he learned in school, in economics courses in school, the IMF craziness that all goes back to David Ricardo and the bullionists in the 1810s. Basically, the idea hasn't changed ever since then. So he's giving wonderful talks. He's obviously, what's the word? An apostate to his previous religion is always the most intense supporter of the new religion to which he's joined. So I'm not criticizing him for Yugoslavia anymore. I like what he's saying. He's lived it down, and because he was dealing with all of the actual diplomats and the high politicians, he's able to tell the truth about, here's really what happened. I was there. Here's what they told me, and I made this mistake, and it was awful. But and this is what we've created, and they're trying to destroy the world now. That basically is what he's saying, especially in the last few weeks. Not only about Ukraine and the US, but about Israel, about US, China, about US military policy everywhere. So what he's writing now is certainly worth listening to and reading. Yeah,
absolutely. It's been it was a really interesting interview. And one one part, I guess, that took me a bit aback when he was surprised. I can't remember now which politician he was talking about, but maybe it was Yeltsin or the finance minister. But they went into a meeting with the Americans, and Jeff Sachs was saying, "Oh, it'll be fine. They'll write down the debts, or you can pause the debts and stuff like that." And then the Americans said, "No, we're not going to give you any grain shipments. We're going to cut that off if there's any lateness in your full interest payments and stuff like that." So they were very hard lined about it. And then he makes this kind of interesting connection to the current situation with Russia and Ukraine, and how Putin, even back then, even after all these negative experiences, when Putin came to power, he was still pretty pro-Western. And that, and I've heard this before too, that, Russia has kind of been more of an unwilling or more begrudging, I guess, partner to the BRICS. Like they were pushed out more than anything else. So yeah, I'd just like to get your thoughts on that. And when you were there, were you in Russia, advising people or consulting? Were you giving a different sort of advice from
totally
what was
different.
happening?
I gave 3 speeches before the Duma and wrote a number of articles for the Russian Academy of Sciences. I urged a land tax for Russia. Say, look, you're giving away you've given away the natural resources. You've given away the monopolies. I wanted, first of all, give everybody their own house that they're in. Don't make them borrow money to buy it. If you have a house, distribute it all to the people. Don't just give it to the 1% and the crooks. And America said, no, only give it to the crooks, because what the Americans realized was that if you give them all the property to the crooks, how do they get the money for it? They have to sell it to U.S. buyers on the stock exchange, and that's what made Russia the leading performing stock exchange in the world. Well, I said, you've already given away Euros nickel, the nickel companies, the oil, the Yukos, and all that, but you can still save everything. Impose an economic rent tax, a resource rent tax, or a land tax. If you've given away a lot of property in the luxury buildings, do a land tax. That way you will collect everything that the kleptocrats had stolen and taken into their own legal possession. So it doesn't matter if they've become the legal owners of oil or nickel or buildings. The land tax can capture this all for the government as their natural fiscal base. And politicians like Vyacheslav Zelensky kept bringing me back to address the Duma on this, but then Yeltsin and his American advisors manipulated the election of Zelensky, so he didn't get reelected to the Duma, and I no longer had sponsors there, although the Russian government, at least the Academy of Sciences, kept publishing my articles. So, but obviously I was only one voice. I wasn't institutionalized. I went with a group of people there, and it was just a few of us. It was organized by an American Georgist. British Georgist, Fred Harrison, put it all together. He almost became an alcoholic in the process of having to keep up with all of the vodka drinks that were necessary to get everything arranged. So he did his best, but there was no institutional backing for what we were doing.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I'm going to flick over to a question from Robert Saget that fits into this. Can you introduce some of your relationships with policymakers in China? You were once at the People's University in Beijing. What was that like? How receptive were Chinese officials to your thinking? And I suppose it would be interesting to hear you compare that to the Russians.
Neither are very receptive to my thinking. And I think the reason is my students and also the professors that I know in China told me that almost all of the officials around President Xi and the upper Communist Party were all trained in the United States. And so since what I was saying was so different from what they learned in the United States, that you had, I guess, in the early 1980s, late 70s, you had Milton Friedman go to Shanghai and convince them, well, you have to let 100 flowers bloom and, let every, don't have central planning. You'll never, the Chinese are creative people, let them all develop. And that's when President Deng came in and had the opening, black cat, white cat, it doesn't matter as long as they catch mice. And you had Shanghai as assigned a proto-financial center, a neoliberal center, gain a lot of weight in China because of that. And the counterweight was basically Beijing. And I taught a number of professors have had me lecture their students and talk to the Central Committee and et cetera. And they will follow particular suggestions I have, like you have to tax and limit the export of rare earth elements. You can't just give them away for the cost of labor. There's an economic rent that you should be charging. They can get that, but when it comes to my overall economic system, especially when I mention volume 2 and 3 of Capital, they're not quite happy with talking about debt, and they look at volume 3 as well. Look, we have our Marxism, you have your Marxism, and I could see that the reaction that I gave, I think in one of my first visits to Peking University, didn't go over. And so for the follow-up to take the lead speaker, they had my friend David Harvey give a speech, said the same thing. You've got to go over volume 3 of Capital. You've got to have you've got to tax the land rent. Otherwise, if you don't tax the land rent, you're going to have, as China gets more and more prosperous, people are going to bid up the price of land, and the younger Chinese are going to have to borrow money from the banks to buy land, and all of this money is going to be paid for the bank instead of using it to pay the tax break, and people are going to make money in China by free lunch in financial ways, not industrial ways. Well, they were not very receptive to that, or to my discussions about federal local relations, where localities, I think I've said this before on our discussion, localities have to raise money for their public services by selling land to developers. Well, that's not a very good idea, because although China owns all the land, how is it going to tax the land's rent? The concept of land rent is sort of alien to the 21st century. This was the central discussion of the entire 19th century. All of classical economics, the physiocrats, Adam Smith, J.S. Mill, Marx, and it's poof. Everybody, there's no concept. They think that land is capital. They don't get that rentier income, whether land rent, monopoly rent, or interest, is not profit. That land and monopoly rights are not a factor of production. They're a choke point. And you can get a choke point and charge rent that you get in your sleep, as John Stuart Mill said, but it's not really a factor of production. Well, it's very hard to get this concept across to people who have been trained in the United States or Europe and have not been familiarized to classical value theory, where rent is the excess of market price over intrinsic cost value. The distinction between intrinsic cost value and market price just doesn't appear in modern economics. And how can I discuss a policy without bringing up this whole history of classical economic thought and political economy that was a whole system that people used to think in terms of and create the narrative in terms of. You've had the neoliberals create their own narrative that finance is going to make you rich, and you can get richer quicker by deindustrializing and just dropping industry, just like nobody wants to be a manual labor anymore. You want to be a manager, a professional managerial class, or a financial manager. Well, that's how countries are made. There's no distinction between a national economy and budget and a private economy and budget.
Michael, with that 19th century fervor around monopoly rents and this widespread recognition that applied labor onto land produces capital, the formation of the American Economics Association in 1885, I've not seen enough of your writing on that particular development and how that led to land and monopoly rents being shoved under capital as a subset of capital. And we went from a 3-factor analysis of land, labor, capital and down to a 2-factor analysis. What do you know about the role of the Ivy League universities and some of those land banking families behind the start of that American Economics Association?
Well, I wrote a whole book about that, America's Protectionist Takeoff, where I show the different regional economic tendencies of the American School of Political Economy. And the first economics professor at the first business school, Pennsylvania, was Simon Patton. And I've talked to him about him in all of my writings. I've written long articles about him and published them in, I think, the Journal of Economics and Sociology before that. Simon Patton essentially said that the Americans around John Bates Clark and Columbia University tried to deny any distinction between rent and profit, saying there was no such thing as unearned income. And Patton explained the problem there. And Patton explained, who was trained in Germany, all of these founders of the American Economic Association had been trained in Germany, that basically was a social democratic economics. And Patton said that you need a 4th factor of production, and that's public infrastructure. And the function of infrastructure, canals, public education, health, wasn't to make a profit like today. It was to provide a basic public service, number one, so it would not be monopolized, and you could provide it at actual cost, or preferably on a subsidized basis or free, like education, healthcare. And the role of public infrastructure wasn't to make an economic gain or profit. It was to lower the cost of living, and hence the cost of production, the cost of employing labor, so that you would leave more of a leeway for industrial investment and profits to take place. Industrial profits were assumed to be reinvested in more capital and more hiring and expanding the economy. And that was what distinguished the American school from all the European free market people that were basically pro-financial analysts. So yes, I discussed that in America's Protectionist Takeoff and in my articles about Simon Patton. And in my book, Killing the Host, I think, gets into this again.
Mm. Yeah, you do have a section on that. Just to finish off this section, Sunil Basu did ask, can you explain how land rent works? I own a big home, but I have a school teacher's income, and I worry I would have to sell up if this was implemented.
Well, David Ricardo, chapter 2 of Ricardo's Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, explained it, gave the classical explanation of land rent. Land rent is what a landowner charges over and above the cost of production on the land, and land has no cost of production. So a landlord may put a building on a land, and the rent from attributed to the building is the profit. But over and above the building, most of the property's value is actually the land price, and that rent is what, as Mill said, landlords make in their sleep. The landlord, the recipient of land rent, as opposed to a real estate developer that actually builds building, is not a factor of production. It's an external survival of feudalism. It's purely a rentier burden paid to the heirs of the warlord conquerors of Britain or other European kingdoms. And there's no social or economic reason for rent, because it doesn't reflect a productive a cost of production, and the rentier, the recipient of rent, does not play a productive role, but is simply extractive of income earned by the economy at large. So read Ricardo's chapter. He states it very clearly. Or any history of economic thought. A good history of economic thought will talk about Ricardo, if it was published before 1950.
And I'll just say, Sunil, from my understanding of your question, what happens is that there's a giant tax shift off the productive sector of the economy and onto monopoly rents, with land raising about 55% of government expenditure, and other forms of monopoly rent also engaging funding the rest of the budget expenditure. So it's quite a unique take that instead of playing the monopoly board game and making our siblings cry, we should be actually taxing the monopolists, and they would be crying as society's freed from all this tax paperwork, all this compliance. There's 125 tax points in Australia, and only 10 of those taxes raise 90% of the revenue. So there's a lot of unnecessary compliance and tax deadweights applied to the economy. And that's why when we talk about land rents, particularly post global financial crisis, all of the major tax reviews in England, Australia, and New Zealand all said that this was the best way to actually reduce this boom bust cycle that the land element really drives.
Well, the question is, if it's a good policy, why is it not adopted? And the reason is that the rent, we no longer have a hereditary landlord class. Anybody can buy land, or anybody can buy a home or an office building, but wherever you're going to buy it, you have to borrow from a bank. And there's the recipients of rent now are the mortgage bankers, and rent is paid to the mortgage banker instead of to the landlord class. And the landlord class that was under attack and successfully overcome in the 19th century, which was a long fight to remove the landlord's control of Parliament in England and politics elsewhere, the landlord class has been replaced by the banking class. And so it's the bankers that receive the rent and are using their political influence in the same way that Britain's House of Lords used to do to prevent a land tax. The bankers are preventing that by saying, wait a minute, if you tax the land now, all that the land rent is already pledged to be paid to the bank as a mortgage, and we'll go under. Do you want us to go under? Well, that's one of the problems that China's dealing with now. How is it going to solve the problem of real estate prices are collapsing? How is it going to solve the problem of creating a viable real estate market without with a land tax, without driving the banks under? That's the problem facing now, the 21st century.
Mark Batko asks, is Trump's idea to raise tariffs a loose cannon concept, or will it actually be effective? You've done plenty of work in this space.
The question is, effective at what? It will it will drastically raise the price of consumer goods for the United States. Imposing a tariff on goods that have to be imported from China, like rare earths or germanium or gallium or items like that, will increase the revenue of the U.S. Treasury for tariffs. I've recommended to China that if Trump increases tariffs to 20%, China will itself impose an export tax of 40% on its exports, to say, well, we don't want you to, we know that if you make, the U.S. Treasury makes money off American imports from China, you will use that money to pay for the military surrounding of us and to militarily attack us. That's where what you'll use the money for. Why should we export to you to make money for your government, to have the money to increase the military industrial budget? We're raising our export tax to you for 40%, maybe, and at some point, we're just going to say, you don't want to buy from us? We'll just stop. You'll go cold turkey. See what happens to your economy then, and to your budget, and to your ability to surround us with military bases and attack us. That's what I'm suggesting.
Lovely. Carl Sanchez has been up here. Have you got a question, Carl?
This should be almost the last because it's getting late and I'm going to eat dinner.
Yep.
Chow time. So I just wanted to make a couple observations. There was a question about what happened with Russia. When Putin came in, one of the first things he did was to make friends with China. He signed a friendship pact with China in 2002. And it's only been, and it's only blown up and to become their joint strategic partnership today. It's huge. So that's the first thing he did. Another thing that isn't as clear as to when he did this, but there was a time in there between 2002 and 2010 when he got in touch with India, and Russia and India and China formed the RIC, R-I-C. That's the core of BRICS, which was, of course, was BRIC first, and then South Africa got added to it. So that's the evolution of that organization is important to understand, because for the geopolitical implications of it, not just then, but also today, because a lot of people think that Modi's not playing along and things like that. Well, that's not true. Modi's doing his own independent thing, and China and India are actually mending their fences, which is a good thing. China, the thing right now is happening that's bad is what's happening with India and Bangladesh and Pakistan. Those are two areas that are hot spots, and then there's Myanmar. Okay, so then you have the Philippines within the ASEAN rattling the everything in the South China Sea for the United States. Mm-hmm. So those issues. On the issue of what happened with the curriculum of political economy in the United States and its teaching, Upton Sinclair wrote a book about that. It's called The Goose Step. It was about how it was self-published. Nobody would touch it. And it was published in 1923. And he explained how the wealthy families in the United States, who were all on the interlocking boards of chairmen of the board for the Ivy League universities, all decided that they would go ahead and eliminate political economy as a subject. It wasn't going to be taught anymore. It was neoliberalism, was and the Bates idea that there's all income is earned is going to be the mantra. So that started essentially at the beginning of the 20th century, before the Fed got taken over by the banking cartel.
It was formed by the banking cartel.
Right.
In the beginning, it
right.
was formed by it, yeah.
So Sinclair, that's the thing. See,
that's Sinclair, a good book. At the same time, Meyer's History of the Great American Fortunes is the other great book about that topic.
Uh-huh. No, that's one I didn't know about, so I'll have to add that to my list.
Uh-huh.
The last point I wanted to make was that in my research with regards to Russia recently, there was an interesting meeting with the head of the largest public bank in Russia. And in the process of that, I got curious to go ahead and look up the listing of the top 10 banks in Russia. So the 3 of the top 10 banks are public banks. And those 3 public banks have more assets than all the private banks in the top 10 combined, which I thought was a very interesting fact. Gee. And then the number 1 private bank is the number 1 bank assets wise, and actually it has more assets than all the private banks combined, just by itself.
The Sber Bank, you mean?
No, it's not. It's the
Well, never mind. We can do it.
it's
later.
the one. It's the one whose name I can't pronounce right at the moment. It starts with a P. Anyway, that issue is that okay. So we want banking to be public. On our public banks, so we don't.
Yes, that's China's great advantage. Right. It doesn't have to borrow from a bondholder class, because when it was you set up the Bank of China initially, there weren't any wealthy Chinese financial class to lend money to government, so it just had to print the money itself.
Right. So what's interesting with the system in Russia right now is that, yeah, the central bank raised the prime rate up to 19%, which is insane, right? Well,
Yes.
guess what? These other public banks have much lower rates that are these special concessionary rates for mortgages, 2%. 2% mortgage. Okay, and it's very popular. So they're going to extend that program.
Yeah.
And so just because the central bank's doing one thing doesn't mean that there's not other stuff that's happening there that's really pumping the economy. Why is the economy growing at 5%? How can it be growing at 5% if the prime rate's 19%?
Yep.
People ask.
Yep.
Well, it's because the central bank really isn't doing the financing.
Yep.
It's these other banks that are priming the investment streams.
That's right.
And then there's the publicly held corporations that also have their own revenue streams that are also doing the same thing. And now today there's the Far Eastern Economic Forum that happened. Well, it's already finished. But there's a lot of talk about what's trillions and trillions of dollars worth of trillions of rubles in investments that's going to come out of that whole affair. So who's really booming? Well, the Chinese, they're continuing to roll. The Russians are the ones that are booming, and the Russians are going to be the prime mover with their integration of ASEAN and into BRICS and the Far Eastern Economic Union. Once that whole thing gets rocking, you can forget about the heartland. The heartland is going to be in the sole possession of the Eurasians. Now, the United States is continuing to go ahead and try and upset all that by its shenanigans in Pakistan and Bangladesh and Myanmar and the Philippines. But otherwise, everything else is on the periphery, and nobody has anything. The Japanese are shot.
Yep.
Their population is in a really drastic decline. Australia and New Zealand are too far removed geographically, and plus their interests are to join the ASEAN, and those other Southeast Asian countries and economies. So what's going to happen?
Well, as you pointed out before, we don't know what's going to happen at the BRICS meeting. We'll have to watch it unfold. They're reinventing the wheel as they go along. They're not using the whole intellectual analytic apparatus that the classical economists of the 19th century developed, but they seem to be redeveloping logic along similar lines. I'm trying to do what I can to introduce the classical economic categories as a way to think. I have no idea at all what the individuals there are going to be doing on their own. I don't have much personal contact with them, and they don't with me. So all we can do is watch.
Yeah. One of the last little item is that debt forgiveness, writing them down, happens in Russia. So that's a matter of policy to the regions. The central government loans them money for investment and development, and instead of having them pay it back, they write it off.
The question is, whose debts are they going to forgive, and what will they do to the people who are supposed to be the recipients of these debts? If they're banks, how will they remain solvent throughout the economy? Everything is connected to everything else. I have no way of knowing how they're conceptualizing their economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in this case, it's government to government debt. Right.
Well, that's what I've been talking about in the various meetings that I have, all my speeches and all the interviews. It's almost time to go to dinner now. I don't have a brief answer to that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chow down.
Thank you.
Yourself,
Thanks,
Michael.
everyone.
Right.
Thanks, everyone, so much for another insightful discussion. We haven't covered any history in this discussion, which is most unlike us, in terms of way back in time. But I love this quote of yours, Michael, in a recent interview with Robertson Erhard. The ale women providing beer were part of a palatial or temple public utility, as the British word pub recognises. I love that little piece. I thought we'd end up there. So another insight on how debt was localized back in the palatial times.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again in early December for another Q&A gathering.
Thank you, Michael, Carl.
Yeah, thank you,
Bye.
Virginia. Thanks, team.
Talk
Thank
to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bon appetit.
Thank you. Okay.